Hi, everyone. It brings me great pleasure to have the opportunity to share with everybody a little bit about my learnings kind of through the different years. So my background is very varied. So when people look at my background and they look at me and, I've been in public sector, I've been in, venture investing, I've been at a, Silicon Valley startup, and now I'm actually working at Alibaba, which is a tech giant, obviously a big company in China. And so when they look at kind of like these different stuff across kind of my experiences across all of these, it always make them wonder, what is it that you have learned looking across all of these? And so, today I want to take kind of the opportunity to share 5 different things, right? 5 very specific learnings I've seen across the years through all these different sectors, different companies, large and small. So the first thing, that I've noticed is that, throughout all these companies, the road is never a straight road. Like the road to success is, there's always a lot of different paths that we have to take. It never feels like, oh, while the company has made it, it's an overnight success. We used to say it looked like a duck, right? Everything on the surface looks really calm. Once you look under the water, everybody is scrambling like mad. It almost feels like you're playing a constant game of whack-a-mole, and you're constantly trying to solve problems. And when you look back after many years and you kind of look at, how much the company has come over the many years, it's like, wow, you have come a long way. But actually throughout the whole time, it was a real grind. Like I don't think there was ever a time when it was like just smooth sailing. And I think that is true for all ventures or entrepreneurial endeavors. And I can remember quite a few of these, like paths to success. So when I spoke with Jeff, when I first met Jeff, who is the founder of Twilio, it was actually his 4th startup, right? So he did a couple of startups. Some of them were successful moderately. The one before Twilio was actually a surfing board shop, which is very different from Twilio itself. And so it was a very, very different company, and it did not really, along the way, he did not really find a huge success, until he came to Twilio. And he started the company in 2008, 2009, which was a really tough fundraising period. And so like just trying to get the company off the ground was really difficult, right? And so the first few years, there was just nobody wanted to fund the company. Like it took Twilio at least 2 years before it could raise a round. And when you look back at all of that, you kind of look at where the company is today, it doesn't feel like it that way. And then at Alibaba now, and I had the pleasure of working with some of the guys who started TikTok, which is, in the last couple of months has become very popular in China. And when I spoke to them and they shared with me kind of like the founding story of TikTok, it is also very interesting because TikTok actually came from the ashes of Lai Wang, which I'm not sure if you guys remember, those who have been in China for a long time, you might know. But Lai Wang was actually an Alibaba project back in, I think, 2013. And it was kind of a reaction to Tencent and WeChat, right? But the project spectacularly failed. A lot of the teams that got together to build Lai Wang went back to do what they were originally doing. But a group of 6 people actually came together, stayed on. They actually moved to Wuhan, which is kind of where Alibaba started. And they worked on TikTok, right? Which was like, okay, we could not build like a B2C app. Why don't we apply the B2B concept, right? Which was around that time, companies like Slack coming up, and TikTok was the similar idea in the same vein, built on the ashes of Lai Wang. So a lot of the infrastructure that TikTok used today was actually built on the ashes of Lai Wang. And so the company, the team actually tried numerous times before they found, okay, this was the jackpot, right? They launched it. They did not know what the reaction was. On hindsight, we all knew it took off. But when they launched it, they did not know what it was going to take them. and it took them a while before they could actually find the right use cases. And the very first customer, interestingly, was actually a customer that sells tofu, right? And so you ask the team at ThinkTalk what tofu is, and the tofu事件, they will know it very well. And it actually took them a while before they found that. And so like the path, as I say, the path to success is a long and winding road. The second thing, and I think Fritz touched on this as well, is that for any company that is looking to achieve great success, you need to think exponentially. So I like to say you need to think 10x, right? You need to take the long view, you need to think big. So when I was at Twilio, I used to work with George. So George is the current COO of Twilio. And he used to be the COO of Salesforce, right? He was at Salesforce from 1999 to 2015, I believe. And so he went from intern all the way to COO, and it's kind of seen the journey of Salesforce. And George has this habit of asking this question. So like I'll go to him and I'll say, I need 30 people for next year, right? Because I want to do this, this, and this. And George will come back. We'll always have a comeback, which is always like, okay, if you don't have 30 people and I give you 300 people, what will you do? Right? And he likes to force people to think big, and he likes to put people in the position of like, okay, if you're not limited by resources, what will you do? And I think that actually changes a lot of like how far the company can go, right? It's the same thing when we look back the journey. I kind of look back the journey of Twilio, and I kind of see who are the guys we were competing with against 5-6 years ago, right? So a lot of the companies that actually, Twilio later on went public, it's now valued about $15 billion. It's a much bigger company than it was then. At that time, when we were thinking about it, we were like, oh, it would be great if a company could exit $1 billion, right? And by that time, we had a lot of competitors, and a lot of them were really looking at, making a quick buck, if you will, right? So a lot of those companies actually sold themselves and were acquired for 250 million, for 300 million, for 50 million. And so a lot of the competitors slowly fell out the way, right? And after a while, the one who was rising from the pack came out to be Twilio, right? Because Jeff had a very clear vision of where he wanted to go, and just kept building it, right? And just build the company from one level to the next level, right? And even now, I still remember back in 2015, we were planning, like the company was just hit the 100 million revenue, and we were making plans of like, okay, what would it take for us to get from $100 million ARR to $1 billion ARR, right? And how long it will take for us to get there. And we had that in mind. We had a date in mind as well, which was 2019. And then we pushed the company towards hitting that $1 billion revenue. Now, the company is probably planning on this $5 billion, $10 billion revenue plan, right? Which is thinking big and going after the big game. The third thing, that I want to share is like, when you look at kind of all the long journey, it's a long slog. Like one of the key things that, as a company, as a startup, you need to think about is in terms of your learning cadence, right? So one of the things that, having worked across all the different sectors, you find that a lot of the teams that do really well, a lot of the companies that do startups that do really well, were the companies that were able to learn really quickly and apply really quickly, right? So the whole learning cadence, the whole iterative mode, and how fast you learn and how fast you apply your learnings to the company to improve the product, to improve how you organize yourself, to improve how your go-to-market motions, all that is extremely important, right? And so when we first, when I was at Twilio, when we started doing this and building it during the early days, the product broke a lot, right? There was a lot of issues that were very unexpected. We put it out there and we kind of put stuff out and it just did not work, right? And we had to go fix it. And after a while, it became really stable, right? That was back in 2012, 2013, during the early days. And then we took that and then we applied that to Asia, and everything broke again, right? Because the fundamental network infrastructure in Asia is radically different from what we have in US, from what we have in Europe. And we had to go through the whole same thing all over again. And so what we learned was that, okay, how fast we apply the changes to our product, how fast we apply the changes to our the way we were set up to run and go after customers in Asia and adapt to the local environment was extremely important, right? The faster we iterate, the faster we were able to get kind of like the flywheel going and be able to adapt to the market and drive kind of revenue and drive the product itself. So that was extremely important in making sure that we can actually get off the ground, right? And so that was one of the things that I think when you build a company, you have to be very mindful of the iterative cycle, right? How fast you can iterate. Like it's okay to fail, but it's very important to take those learnings and apply it in. Like thinking in days, thinking in weeks, instead of thinking of months and years makes a world of difference, right? And so that's the third thing. The fourth one, one of like, when I worked across, all the different sectors, one of the things that was interesting to me is how some of those mental models could apply across the different sectors. Like one example, like one very specific example is, when you look at venture investing is a game of looking for like a big home run, right? So you're looking for a company that can, return 10, 20, 30x, 100x, and you make 10 bets, most of them, more than half of them will probably fail, right? And that's kind of like the venture investing model. Interestingly, when I joined Twilio, that very same model actually applied in kind of the developer economics. So when Twilio first started, a lot of it was looking at the B2D economics, right? What we call the business to developer economics. And what actually happened there was that, we will work with a lot of developers, we will work with a lot of startups, but we don't actually know which startup will take off, right? But the startup that actually take off would actually be consuming a lot of resources on cloud communications, right? And actually drives a lot of the economics of, that drives Twilio's revenue. So if you look at companies like Uber, Airbnb that started using Twilio way back, that was actually how Twilio started driving a lot of revenue. It actually grew together with the Uber and Airbnb. As Uber and Airbnb started growing, across the world and brought Twilio across the world. And when we started working with Uber and Airbnb, they were really small company. I still remember when we started with Uber, they were 10 people. Right? It was the company in San Francisco doing black car service, and nobody really knew what the company was doing. But they needed a way to send message to inform you that your car has arrived, and we helped them launch that. And as they grew, we grew with them, and we scaled with them across different companies, across different cities, across different countries, and that was the entire notion of developer economics. Playing it out in a similar fashion to venture investing. And so when I worked across, when I worked in the government in the public sector, it was the same thing. I was working in the Ministry of Finance. It was really interesting because at point in time, you think about how you want to carve out the budget. I realized that a lot of times when we think about things, we actually look at, okay, we need to take bets, right? And like, should we do this or should we take that, right? And a lot of that bet was looking at, okay, we need to think about what is the possible outcome down the road. But you have to take the bet without knowing what will happen, right? And so you cannot take the budget, you slice it out and you say like, okay, we need to invest into these 10 new things with the hope that maybe one of them will probably drive the future for Singapore, right? And those 10 bets into different industries was extremely important because you don't know what the future will be. And it was very similar on hindsight to kind of what you do when you do venture investing. And so that was a lot of that mental models, what I realized is that it's very transferable. And so similarly, I think when you look at your startup, you should look at what you have brought in, what you have, your experiences, and how that relate, how that apply to your existing, what you're working on. Because a lot of that will actually bring very new perspectives and new models and new insights that might drive the disruption in the industry itself. And so that brings me to the last thing. When I was working in a lot of the teams, a lot of the companies, as I started, usually I was the only guy, right? When I started working at building up the venture team in the US, I was the only guy in the US, right? And after that, build up the team behind me. Same thing when I started at Twilio, I was the first guy in APAC. And so I was running around 1 month in APAC, 1 month in US for a good year or so, building up the team, meeting up the customers, building up the product, and working with a lot of the telco partners to connect into their infrastructure, right? And same thing right now, again, the Alibaba team, building up a lot of the teams from scratch, especially across the product. An interesting thing as you find, as I work across all of these, and I've seen for myself as well as Twilio scale, is that what get you from point A to point B, like what you need to do when you're a 10-person, 20-person company, what you need to do when you're a 100, 200-person company, 200-person team, what you need to do when you're 1,000 people is very different, right? So when you're just starting out, you are basically just one person, right? And you basically have to do everything by yourself, right? And you need to build a team, you have to build a product, you have to solve customer issues, you have to pitch to the customers, you have to pitch to investors. As you scaled up, right, a lot of it is spending your time hiring the team, building up the team. And in my case, during the early days of Twilio, it was like, I need to find the sales director, I have to find the marketing director, I have to build up the operations team, I make sure we have a support team behind that, have a product team on the ground, trying to drive the product iteration, all of that. And building all of that to be able to kind of free up your energies to focus on the next thing, right? And so that was taking a step back, not doing it yourself, and kind of delegating it out. And then subsequently, when you're like 300 people, when you're managing a big team, you kind of play the role of a cheerleader and a champion, right? You have to inspire your team, you have to lead them with a vision. A lot of stuff you're not gonna be able to know everybody in the team. You're not going to be able to manage everything on the ground. And you have to be able to delegate and choose the right people to lead and build the teams, right? And so at each stage, you kind of have to scale, and the team has to scale, bring it on to the next level. That pretty much brings me to the end of it. Just want to be able to leave you guys with 5 insights that I've learned across the years. I hope that will help you with your ventures. Thank you very much.